Welcome to Seeking the Overlap, the podcast where we're creating a more connected world, one conversation at a time. I'm connection strategist, professional friend maker, and your host, Baily Hancock. Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling unsure if the other person liked you as much as you liked them? Or maybe you found yourself wondering why it's so hard to break out of your shell and make meaningful connections, even when you know how important they are. Any of this sounds familiar, you are not alone, and you're in the right place. In today's episode, we're digging into the science behind these common struggles and giving you the tools to overcome them so you can finally feel confident in your ability to build deep, authentic relationships. My guest today is David Robson, a science writer and author based in the UK with a degree from Cambridge University. He's worked as a feature editor at New Scientist and a senior journalist at the BBC, and his work has appeared in The Guardian, The Atlantic, Men's Health, The Wall Street Journal, and many more. His latest book, The Laws of Connection, The Scientific Secrets of Building a Strong Social Network, is packed with insights on how we can all improve our relationships through science-backed strategies. So, if you've ever wondered why connecting with others feels more challenging than it should, or you wish you knew how to break through the barriers to true connection, you are about to get some answers. David, welcome to Seeking the Overlap.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
I'm excited to chat with you. I'm a super connector, but I'm always looking for new tips and tricks. And your book does a really great job of outlining the psychological barriers that come with connection or the lack of connection. But before we have you put on your science writer and connection expert hat, I would like to get to know you as a human a little bit better. So we're going to play a game that I called 3 Truths, No Lies. Based on the game, 2 truths and a lie, but I'm not really interested in lies. I would actually like to get to know you. So I have a bunch of random questions that I'm going to just pick and see what you have to say about it. Favorite TV show or movie growing up?
Will and Grace was my favorite TV
Oh,
program. Yeah,
that's a good one. Have you watched the reboot?
I haven't. I felt like it was perfect the way they'd left it. So, yeah, I'm not going to go there.
I think that's fair. Sometimes you need to leave your nostalgia neatly tucked into that box. Okay, what is a food that reminds you of your 20s?
I'd say melanzane alla parmigiana because I had that when I was on holiday in Rome a couple of times, and my partner cooked it for me a lot when we first moved in together. So it's got a lot of personal memories for me.
Oh, yours is so much classier than most people's. Usually because I say your 20s, it's like ramen noodles, or mine is pita pit from college, which, yeah, just a
Well,
mess of ingredients, but yours is very classy.
I don't cook myself, so I can't take any credit for that.
Well, you're very lucky. Okay, one more question. There's a knock at your door, and on the other side is someone you'd be so excited to see. Who is it?
I think it would be Natalia Ginzburg, who's my favorite Italian writer as well. And I just love her style of writing so much. She's long dead, but yeah, it would be someone like that, someone who you'd never have the chance of speaking to in reality.
Oh, I love it. Thank you for playing. Your book, The Laws of Connection, is so interesting because you're a science writer. It seems like you came at writing this book from a different angle than I would have written it because I'm not a science writer. I'm much more into the social components of it all and the human piece of it. What made you write this book?
As a science writer, science is always the best lens for me to view life's problems through. I love art and culture, and that's why I do incorporate that and philosophy into my book as well. But I still want to have hard evidence. I'm quite analytical in that way. I want to know that what I'm writing isn't just platitudes, but that it's actually been proven for a large number of people. Why I got into writing about social connection, it's just a subject that has always interested me because I am a bit of a kind of shy extrovert. So I absolutely have this huge need for connection and for being around people, even if I'm by myself for just half a day. I do go a bit stir crazy. I actually feel like all of these thoughts are going to burst out of my head if I don't talk to someone. But as a shy person as well, there had been barriers to getting the connection that I craved. And as a teenager growing up, I had this speech impediment until I was 16. That was an obvious barrier. I had some close friends at school, but I really dreaded speaking to strangers, to new people. And even when I cured the speech impediment, went to university, became a journalist, my confidence definitely grew, but I would also have periods where I felt very lonely. And when I came across a lot of this new research showing not just why social connection is so important for our health and being, but also psychologically, why is it that we sometimes hold ourselves back and we don't get that connection that we crave? I was personally just very fascinated by that. And then once I learned more about it, I wanted to share that story with other people because actually my experiences aren't very unique at all, actually. Lots of people feel a bit shyer than they would like to be, and they find ways to compensate, but they still really want to get more connection. And so this book, I was hoping, will help people to do that.
Did it help you?
It did, yeah, definitely. I always have put into practice whatever I learn and write about, and I certainly did with this. So many of the barriers that I described, even just the awareness of them, understanding what they are, why we act the way we do, even that can help to promote behavioral change. But then there are some evidence-based strategies too that can just very easy psychological techniques that we can apply to overcome those barriers. I found it quite transformative, actually. It would be a lie if I was to say there's never any kind of slight awkwardness in social interactions, because I think it's the uncertainty that also makes social interactions so exciting and thrilling and fulfilling. But it's absolutely helped me to appreciate that more, to strengthen my bonds, and to be a little bit braver when I do approach strangers, when I have to go to a party where I don't know anyone, that kind of situation.
It's funny you say that social awkwardness or the unknown of connecting with somebody new is kind of part of it, right? I'm an extrovert for sure. Love meeting people. I call myself a professional friend maker. And yet, there's still that hesitation that I feel. The way that I flip it around for myself is I think, what if my future old friend is in this room?
Mm,
What if tonight is
yeah.
the night I meet this really important person in my life? And so that helps switch the mindset around from one of wanting it to be over to one of curiosity and one where I'm like, are you my future old friend? Are you my future old friend? And so the process becomes a lot more playful. You're almost uncovering, is it you? Is it you? Oh, it's not you. It's definitely not you.
Right. It is unlikely that everyone you meet is going to become like your new best friend. But even if your connection only lasts for that interaction, that can still be incredibly fulfilling. Like the research shows that when we do overcome our fears of awkwardness and talk to strangers, that actually, even if it goes no further than that, we get this boost to our well-being. I'm really trying to tell people with this book is that it's a numbers game too. So if you struggle, if you want to make more friends in general, you do have to go through that process of meeting more people. And the chances are that some of those people are going to be a lasting relationship for you.
Let's go back to the why of this all. There's so much information and so many articles and thought pieces coming out around the benefits of connection and having those strong social bonds. What are some of the key ones that you found in your research? Why do we need people?
I think most people understand we need them for our personal happiness, although certainly some would disagree. But we can't be totally independent. It's very bad for your mental health. But it's also bad for your physical health. And I think that's what's really come out of the research recently is that having a more supportive social circle, that feeling of mutual understanding, not necessarily just the size of your social circle, but the quality of those relationships is really intimately tied with our physical health. It seems to be linked to all kinds of diseases like diabetes, Alzheimer's, how likely you are to have a heart attack or stroke. And we know that this is related to real physiological changes within the body itself. So when we feel socially excluded, you start producing more blood clotting factor, which is a risk factor for heart disease, and inflammation, which is a risk factor for loads of diseases, because inflammation's part of the immune system's response to infection, which is good in the short term. But if you have chronic inflammation, it damages tissues in the long term. Now, you might ask, like, why did we evolve like this? And it's simply because in our evolutionary history, other people were just fundamental to our safety. We needed them to protect us from predators, from people in other groups. And so if we started to feel socially excluded, we might be at a greater risk of injury. If we're thrown out of the group, then the body has to prepare itself for a potential wound. And so we have that higher inflammation and that blood clotting factor because that's actually going to help to prevent us from getting an infection to help those wounds to heal. Again, it's like a great short-term response, but over months or years, it's going to have a toll on your body. And that's why it's then implicated in all of those diseases.
It's literally life or death. I think it's so fascinating because you talk about this in your book too, how we've always just looked at well-being and health from a body perspective, not a psychological, mental perspective. And that's where so much of these social bonds can really play in. Even in my own life, my hardest times in life were when I felt most isolated and when I felt like people didn't know what I was going through, or I couldn't resonate with anybody, or there wasn't that support. And any time in my life where I have turned things around, it has been through building and nurturing a community of people around me. I'm so glad this is all coming to light, because I also just think what a world we would live in if people felt more seen and more supported emotionally and mentally and just as a human being. Like, everything would change.
It would. And you know what I feel like what we kind of lack, I think we've always lacked, and probably we do more these days, is like you say, it's like seeing people as human beings and
Mm.
recognizing that people are complicated. It's not black or white, but there's like a lot of gray. And there'll be some bits of
Understatement of
people,
the
right?
millennium. People are complicated.
Yeah. And there'll be some things that you like and some things that are harder to deal with, or things you disagree with, but you have to, what you want to do is to try to understand the whole person.
Empathy and being able to recognize that even if you do empathize with somebody, you're not always going to have the whole picture, because they might not even have the whole picture,
Right.
right? How unaware are we of our own reasons for doing the things that we do? Unless you've been doing the deep work and the inner reflection, so many people are walking around not even really feeling connected to themselves, let alone other people.
I totally agree. It's very difficult sometimes for us to introspect and to understand ourselves. And then that definitely makes it harder to form lasting relationships too.
What is keeping us from doing it? What are some of the barriers that we're up against when it comes to forming these social connections?
I list like 13 laws, but the one that really, really caught my attention and actually inspired me to look more deeply was something called the liking gap. And I'm really in love with this research because it just chimed so well with my own experiences. When I've spoken to other people, it's very common. And this is that kind of feeling when you first met someone and you might have a great conversation, like you really felt like there was a rapport. You respected the other person, you found them funny. They said things that you could really identify with and relate to. And then you go away from the conversation and you still have these doubts that they reciprocated those feelings. So you assume that you liked them more than they liked you. And what the research shows is that actually that's so common that the other person is probably going away from the conversation feeling exactly the same. So neither of you have really recognized how liked you are, how appealing you are in that conversation. And my own personal experiences, I think my social anxiety often manifested in not in the kind of approaching the interaction itself, it was those feelings afterwards. And it's almost like the more I liked someone, and the more I wanted them to like me, like the more I'd have this kind of post hoc anxiety where I'd go over all of these things that I thought, like I'd said, that were clumsy or awkward. The research really suggests that actually we're just being way too pessimistic and self critical here. And that actually, if we just had a bit more faith that the other person liked us as much as we like them, we'd just find it easier to then build on that rapport, to suggest new meetings, to give them a call or send them an email. But instead, just as it's about to sprout from the seed, we let it wilt and die. That's such a shame because we actually have so many more opportunities for connection that are easily within our reach. They're almost literally standing in front of us sometimes, and we just don't build on that.
When I talk with people about building, nurturing, and leveraging relationships, I find that one of the weaker parts for most people is the nurturing piece. And
Mm.
that's probably a lot to do with this liking gap, where we can blame it on lack of time or whatever, but it's likely a lot of stuff going on in our own heads, exactly like
Yeah.
that, right? So, what's the key? What's the trick? Do you just tell yourself that's not true and you just move forward anyway? Do the follow up, even if you're second guessing the connection?
Obviously, you still have to be mindful that not everyone is going to want to be your friend. And that doesn't have to be personal. It could just be they don't have enough time to have
Right.
another friendship or whatever. They might have other stuff going on in their life. You can be very sensitive to them and take rejection very gracefully, but just be a bit braver. But I think also, more importantly, I think it's just to practice self-compassion. And there's a load of good research on self-compassion, meditations you can do that seem to nurture self-compassion, exercises like writing a letter to yourself when you're feeling anxious about something, as if you're writing to a friend. That kind of helps you to just treat yourself a bit more kindly. And we have to just practice that and try to keep it at the top of our heads. I think whenever we're having these doubts, just tell ourselves, go easy on yourself. The truth is, it probably isn't as bad as you thought. And I think if that just becomes habitual within your kind of thinking patterns, I think that will naturally just make us less likely to suffer from the liking gap.
I'm very glad it's something that's called out in your book because we often don't realize that our hangups or our concerns are actually a lot more common than we realize. Like giving it a name obviously means that it's not unique to us, right? If we're all feeling this, then it's a lot easier to move forward and say, okay, I'm feeling a little self conscious. I think I maybe said too much, or did I talk too much? You start to have those questions, right? You replay the conversation over and over in your mind. Maybe this is a good excuse to be like, I'm just not going to do that. And I'm going to move forward with the assumption that they had just as good of a time as I did. And then let's see where it goes from there.
Exactly. And also, I think we just underestimate our ability to like repair those tiny fractures. Maybe the other person did think he spoke a lot in that conversation, but it doesn't mean they won't want to meet you again. People are quite forgiving. And next time you do meet them, maybe you can just make more of an effort to ask them about their life. A tiny little error doesn't have to spell the end of a potential friendship. And that's what we should remember as well. We should just be more forgiving of ourselves and more positive about our ability to correct our errors.
Yeah, I think that's just good advice in general. One of the parts that I super duper resonated with was when you talked about having a shared reality with somebody, how that increases the amount you feel like you like each other. Obviously, this podcast is called Seeking the Overlap, and that's essentially what I'm talking about. It's finding the overlap on the Venn diagram between you and the other person so that you can start from where you have commonalities. It's not just, oh, we're both from the same place. We went to the same school. Sure, that helps you get to know the person a little bit better, but it's the way you think, the things you both find funny, the jokes you would both laugh at. If you're just meeting somebody for the first time, short of playing 20 questions every time, how do you crack the surface level conversations? How do you get into that slightly deeper level of getting to know somebody in a casual conversation? Can you?
I definitely think you can. I think it might be important to even emphasize just how small the cues can be that signal a shared reality. I found it a very funny experiment, actually, where the researcher got people to play, what if Jennifer Aniston were like a kitchen appliance or a household appliance? Would she be like a screwdriver, a cocktail shaker, a saw? Like really bizarre game. There's no right answer at all. And your answers really don't mean much about who you are, actually. But just knowing that another person gave the same answer as you on this really trivial question actually increased people's sense of shared reality and made them feel less alone and made them feel closer to that other person. If you both say that Jennifer Aniston's like a cocktail shaker or rather than a toothpick, it's just like saying that somehow you have this tiny little bit of shared vision of the world and the same opinions. We don't have to be looking for really profound similarities, although obviously that helps. But what the research really shows is it's just the number of times you feel that you're on the same page or that you're tuned to the same wavelength. One of the problems is that because of our natural reserve, we maybe just don't express similarity enough. Someone might be thinking exactly the same thing as you, but we don't necessarily tell them that that's the fact, that we really agree with them, that we validate them, that we've been through the same experience, that we've felt the same emotions. We might just let it go in the conversation. And I think that is a wasted opportunity. Now, I'm certainly not saying that we should fake this and like always just agree with everything someone says, because I actually think there is a point of disagreement, that can itself be an interesting topic of conversation, because you might find that underneath your disagreement, you still agree on the same values, for example. It's more complex than just agreeing with everything people say, but actually just being a bit more open, verbalizing how we're feeling. I think that's really just one of the ways that we can do this.
That brings up an excellent point. I go back and forth with my feelings about saying, oh, me too. or, oh, I had this same thing happen to me. So there's two schools of thought on the internet about resonating with somebody. Let's say you say, yes, oh, I went through this thing, or, oh, I broke up with my partner and we had just moved to this new city. So I was all alone. Like, I could say, oh my God, that's happened to me too. There's one school of thought that says, don't make this about you. They're sharing a story. You don't need to turn it into a story about you. And the other school of thought is, it's showing them they're not alone. So I might have similar feelings and we've been through a similar shared experience. I don't really know how to do the right thing. And maybe it's just based on the person you're talking to, how that's received, whether it's, okay, I was sharing my thing and now you've shared your thing versus, oh my God, thank you for telling me that. Now I feel like I can talk to you more intimately about it.
I think it's a question of balance and kind of nuance and sensitivity. Like, the last thing you want to do is someone's just started to tell you like about this bad breakup, and immediately you're like, you'll never guess what happened to me. And you don't even listen to their story. You don't validate them. You don't show any curiosity in what they're feeling. You don't check your own assumptions. You're just assuming that it's actually exactly the same as your own story without even bothering to ask them whether that's the case. Like, that is not going to be good for connection. But I think provided that you do all those things that I've mentioned, provided that you do actually let them be the center of attention as they're talking about this very recent and painful experience. And then you're just interjecting with your own experience where it's like super relevant without kind of dominating the conversation. I think that to me would seem like the more sensible way of going about this. And actually, I think there is research showing this, that self-disclosure, even in these times of crises, self-disclosing while you're supporting someone else can be beneficial. And like you say, it can enhance trust. You might have an interesting viewpoint. You've got experience and knowledge that could be relevant and beneficial. And it seems absurd not to share that, but just make sure it's still about the other person, not just all about you.
We're all in our own heads. Some people are much better than others at reading social cues and being able to pick up when somebody's feeling supported by that versus feeling one upped by it. Just pay attention to how it's being received and make sure that
Mm.
you're not doing the one upper thing. You're literally saying, oh my gosh, me too. Tell me more about your experience, right? I think there's probably a delicate balance there, like you said. And again, it all comes back to the overlap, right? It's you don't want to be on one extreme or the other. Do it in a way that's delicate and thoughtful and makes the other person feel seen versus steamrolled by your own experience.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not a case of like competition, but
Right.
who's
The trauma
the
Olympics.
exactly. Which I think certainly sometimes it can seem like that. But yeah, it's like just making sure that the other person is the priority. That's just a really good ground rule.
One big concept that I really want to dig into with you is the beautiful mess effect. Tell me what that is, because I feel like it taps into this vulnerability. It taps into this humanity that I'm so deeply interested in as it relates to connection. What is the beautiful mess effect?
When we have something that we feel shame for, like a vulnerability that could be screwing up at work or having a bad breakup or a secret crush that you don't really want to tell anyone about, any of these things that we think make us feel vulnerable, we assume that other people see this as like a sign of weakness, that they'll feel alienated away from us because we've shown that we're not this perfect human being. The research shows that those fears are unfounded. People in general appreciate our honesty when we talk about things that we find embarrassing, and they see courage in that too. It's brave to admit that you feel nervous about public speaking or that you've got body issues or any of these things that they've looked at in the experiments. People really do seem to warm to you because you're being more authentic and because you're being brave.
Hmm. It goes completely against everything that I think so many of us believe, especially people who are like me, recovering perfectionists, recovering overachievers, people that have gone about their lives with the assumption that you need to look like you know what you're talking about. You need to look like you have it all together. You need to look like you've never made a single mistake in your entire life because nobody will trust you otherwise. And in fact, it's the exact opposite. Who trusts a perfect person? Nobody, because I think on some level we know nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect. What else are you hiding if you're pretending to be this perfect human that has no flaws and has never felt shame about anything a day in their life?
Yeah, totally. And trust is just so important for establishing that shared reality because if you start doubting that someone's being honest with you, the shared reality is meaningless, you suspect then they're going to be that kind of person who's just saying what you want to hear, but there's no real depth to the connection that you have. Perceptions of honesty are hugely important here. There was this study examining people's dating choices where the questionnaire asked these questions about really bad behavior. Have you ever fantasized about torturing someone? Have you ever knowingly had sex with someone while you're carrying an STD? Like, not the kind of things you want to hear about a
I'll
potential
add
date.
those questions to my 3 truths, no lies next time. We'll get right into it.
Yeah, that would definitely get some colorful response. But if you could believe that someone was telling the truth and they said they hadn't done any of these horrific things, they are a better date, like a better prospect for you. But I think what was interesting was that on the scale that people could answer, it was like, yes, one time, sometimes, often, prefer not to answer. And on average, people always rated the person who said prefer not to answer worse than the person who admitted anything, even worse than someone who said they do it frequently. Because the idea that there's not just the possibility that they'd done this thing, but that then they were hiding it from you just made you think like they're like a pretty shady character who you don't want to connect to.
It's like the first chink in the armor, right? If you feel
Yeah,
like, if you're lying about this, what else aren't you telling the truth about? And now you're questioning
right.
the whole makeup of this person. Obviously, there's a wide range of vulnerability. Do you have any advice for people in terms of knowing how much to share versus what is too much or what's unnecessary? Is there a fine balance between plucking out the more palatable vulnerabilities versus the ones that are a little bit uglier or scarier or rough around the edges? How does one know how much is too much or not enough?
The conclusion I draw from this is just if there is something that's really important to you that you want people to know about, then you should share it because actually they're going to understand better like where you're coming from. I think like sharing your sexuality, for example, like I'm gay, I felt I was scared about coming out. I came out, I felt a lot closer to people once I'd come out because hiding that the fact that I was gay from the people around me meant they just didn't understand an important part of me and where I was coming from. It meant that I couldn't be honest in conversations about dating or that kind of chat that you have when you're like adolescence. I felt excluded and isolated before I came out. On the other hand, say there's some stuff that just isn't relevant for the kind of conversations you're having. One of the studies looked at people like whether they had wet the bed or not, and like the consequences of other people knowing that fact. It was a positive piece of research because it showed people didn't care if someone had previously wet the bed. It was positive in the fact that we don't have to worry so much if stuff slips out or whatever. But on the other hand, no one actually needs to know that.
That's not going to make you feel closer to somebody knowing that,
Right,
right?
because especially for most of these people, it was like something that happened when they were kids or whatever. You don't
Right.
need to share everything. It's all a question of is this important for the other person, to know to understand me, basically.
I think that's very true. I last year came out as bisexual and I am married to a man. I've never even dated another woman. And yet it felt like something I wanted to claim and share because not sharing it felt people don't fully know the entirety of me. And I think it maybe made some people feel closer to me. It maybe drove some people further from me. And that's great. I'd rather people at least know as much about me as I'm willing to share so they can decide, am I their person? Am I one of their people? The connections that I had prior to sharing that, there's part of me that felt they don't actually know all of me. So maybe they don't actually really love me or they don't actually really resonate with me because they're missing some information. So for me, it was like, okay, that's a big one. And you can do with that what you want.
Exactly. And I think that's what the research on secrets really tells us is that when they have one of these big secrets, they feel isolated because, like you said, you don't know if the other people will accept you for who you are. So you feel more distant from them, even the people who are closest to you. And I'm sorry to hear that some friendships did become more distant because you'd shared that. And I think that's a risk we have to acknowledge. Not everyone's going to respond in the best way, but I think it's also powerful the friendships that do remain, you can feel closer to them, and they're the ones that you really can value. They're the ones that
Exactly.
really matter. Yeah.
And I think sometimes when you share these things with people you are close to, it also gives them an opportunity to show you who they are
Yep,
or who they're
totally.
not,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
it was a two-way process for me. It was like, if you can't support this or you have weird responses to it, then good to know for me. I don't want people in my inner circle who don't accept all of me or who question why I do something or why I tell people something. I tend to be a very transparent person just by nature, but I think everybody has things that they keep close to the vest just because there's fear there of being rejected. At the end of the day, that's the antithesis to connection, is feeling like if you try and connect and you're rejected, is that worse than never having connected at all?
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually, that's something that I have only really recognized after having written the book, actually, is
Mm.
that having learned about these principles of how to connect with people and how to strengthen your relationships and build new ones, it's also given me the confidence sometimes to think that I don't actually care if I lose some of these relationships that just weren't fulfilling, if the people just weren't treating me with the respect that I deserve and need. Because I think in the past, if you're worried about the amount of social connection you get, you can cling to people who actually aren't very good for you. And then it's like a huge relief just to realize, fine, if you don't want me the way I am, I can get the love that I need somewhere else.
Exactly. You make space for people that are more aligned with who you are or
Yeah.
who you're becoming. I think that's a big thing that people don't really realize till they start to hit adulthood, is you're also going to keep becoming who you really are over time, and that person that you present to people around you is likely going to change. I have friends from elementary school still, and I have friends that I have brought into my life in the last 5, 10 years who know an entirely different version of me than those childhood friends. And I actually find it interesting and challenging in maybe a good way to see if those long-term friendships will keep evolving alongside me, because not all of them have, right? Some of them have fallen away because I became somebody that was different than who I was when I was 14. But I'm thinking, thank God.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone should be changing. I really think we should aspire to be better people. I don't mean like more ambitious or
No.
richer, that kind of thing, but like my shyness, for example. Like, I do think like some of my childhood friends really struggled to adjust to the fact that I became more confident as an adult. And maybe they felt kind of some fragility or vulnerability there, that they worried that like I wasn't depending on them so
Mm.
much. But like they should have wanted the best for me, because there wasn't anything good coming out of my shyness apart from unhappiness. So yeah, like people have to like they have to respect our growth and recognize that we can still maintain the connection we had, even if we are slightly different versions of ourselves.
And I have no problem letting some friendships fade away. That's something I've had to come to. My 30s felt like a lesson in friendships evolving and fading away. And when it started to happen early in my 30s, it was really jarring and really upsetting, because it's like, what does that say about me if
Yeah.
our friendship couldn't survive my own evolution? But now the way I look at it is, not every relationship is meant to be forever, and that's okay. It's like rewatching your childhood favorite movie in a way. The relationship you had at that phase of your life, let that be beautiful and let that remain solid in your memory. And if somebody isn't evolving alongside you and doesn't like the more evolved version of you, that is okay. You can shake hands, give each other a hug, and then part ways without tainting the entire beautiful friendship you had up until that point.
Yeah, exactly. As people kind of drift apart, you might also drift closer to them again in the future,
Yeah.
provided that people are treating you with like the respect that you deserve. Provided you know that they do have your best interests at heart. Then, if your interests have started diverging, they can just occupy a different place within your social network. It doesn't have to be this kind of great breakup or tragedy. And we can just have faith that actually some of those friendships, they evolve, but they'll also, they may come back to us, we might come back to them. Over a whole lifetime, it's very difficult to maintain all your friendships. So we should be maybe just a little bit less anxious about that inevitable change that is occurring.
I agree. Okay, let's do a quick rapid fire connection cue. First question. You just walked into a social event, be it a networking mixer or a friend's house party where you do not know anyone besides the host. What is your first move?
I guess like my very first move would be to get a drink and some canapes.
Wise
Yeah.
man.
But then, yeah, I guess I would look around the room for someone who is maybe looking a little bit isolated themselves.
Mm.
So someone who's standing by themselves or just maybe in a couple. Because I think with approaching strangers, it's better for us, but it can also be an act of altruism. If someone is feeling a bit awkward and we can go over and give them the opportunity to connect, is benefiting everyone.
Oh, that's an excellent reframe because then it also gets you out of your awkwardness because you're effectively going to help somebody. Even if
Right.
they were fine on their own, it's a good mental place to be like, bless their heart. Let me go make them feel included.
Exactly. And again, read the social cues. Like
Yeah.
maybe they don't want to chat, maybe they're happy checking the phone or whatever, in which case I'd move on to someone else. But
Okay. What's one thing you wish people knew about connection?
I guess this is addressed to men more than women, but it's just please ask more questions.
Oh,
Like just
please say it again. Say it again
yeah,
louder.
just ask more questions and ask good questions. I'm not talking about it's a phenomenon called boomer asking where you're like, tell me about your job. Anyway, I do this, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like straight back on the person. Just
Oh,
ask genuine,
interesting.
curious questions. It's like the first piece of advice you get when you're learning about social skills is ask questions and be interested in other people. But I still think not enough people are doing this. So yeah, just
I
like,
could not agree
please
more.
do it. Yeah.
It doesn't even have to be hard. Okay, look, even if you were zoned out, which is not okay, but it happens in networking events, it happens in social parties. Maybe you're not fully listening to what they're saying, but you want to continue the conversation. You can just say, really, that's super interesting. Tell me more about that. Or you don't even have to reference something they just said. Just ask a follow up question. That
Yeah.
makes people feel so good.
The follow-up questions are so important. And I actually feel this very strongly as well. Like sometimes someone tells you something and you might not fully get like why they think it's interesting. It might seem boring to you, but that should be your prompt then to ask another follow-up question to work out why it's important to them. And I don't think saying you're not interested to me is a good enough excuse.
No.
You should try to be interested if you can be.
Yes, be a curious, interested person, even if you're not interested in the subject. That's gold. When people tell you something they care about, that is gold waiting for you to mine it. They've just shown a little bit of their heart to you. And to not have that followed up on or excavated can feel worse than never having that conversation to begin with.
Yeah, no, it totally can. And what I find in conversation is that often when you dig a bit deeper, what seemed quite boring can actually become quite interesting. You just have to ask the right questions to get to that nugget.
Exactly. David, thank you so much for all of this great wisdom and these amazing tips and excellent advice about connection. Thank you for writing this book. We'll link it in the show notes. Please go read it. It's a really good guide for people that are just feeling like they don't quite know how to connect. So thank you, David.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Seeking the Overlap. I would be so grateful if you would take a second to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help others discover the show. And if you share this episode on social, be sure to tag me at Baily Hancock so I can send you some love. Until next time, happy connecting.